The mirror in the master bathroom of the Thompson house was an unforgiving witness. Its wide, polished surface reflected every detail of Emily Thompson's face-pale skin, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, eyes dulled by exhaustion, and a fresh bruise blooming across her left cheek like a cruel watercolor. She stood there, motionless, her fingers gripping the edge of the marble countertop as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, a shadow of the vibrant artist she'd been a decade ago. Her chestnut hair, once glossy and styled with care, hung limply around her shoulders, tangled from restless sleep. The bruise, still tender, throbbed under her fingertips as she traced its edges, wincing at the sting. Emily's breath hitched, a quiet sob catching in her throat. She didn't cry often anymore, not because the pain had dulled, but because tears felt like surrender, and she wasn't ready to give James that victory. Not yet. The faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the woman she used to be, the graphic designer who'd won awards for her bold, colorful work, who'd laughed easily and dreamed big. That woman was gone, buried under years of James's control, his fists, his venomous words. "Mommy, why are you sad again?" The small voice jolted Emily from her thoughts. She turned, hastily wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Lily stood in the doorway, her 7-year-old frame dwarfed by the oversized doorframe. Her dark curls framed a face too perceptive for her age, her hazel eyes wide with worry. She clutched a stuffed bunny, its ears worn from years of being her constant companion. Emily forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "Mommy's just tired." Lily tilted her head, unconvinced. She was too young to articulate the truth, but old enough to sense it. She'd seen the way her mother flinched at loud noises, the way she wore long sleeves, even in Atlanta's humid summers, the way she hurried to please James before his temper flared. Stepping closer, Lily reached up with her small hand, her fingers hovering near the bruise on Emily's cheek. "Did Daddy do this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily's throat tightened, a familiar wave of shame washing over her. She wanted to lie, to shield Lily from the ugliness of their reality, but the words stuck. Instead, she knelt down, cupping Lily's face in her hands. "Listen to me, baby," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "No matter what happens, I love you, and I'll always be here for you. Okay?" Lily nodded slowly, but her eyes darted toward the hallway, where the faint creak of floorboards signaled James's approach. The air in the room shifted, growing heavy, oppressive. Emily felt it too, a prickle of dread that coiled in her stomach. She straightened, ushering Lily toward the door. "Go to your room, sweetheart," she whispered urgently. Now, Lily hesitated, her small hand lingering in Emily's before she obeyed, her footsteps soft as she disappeared down the hall. The bedroom door swung open just as Lily's door clicked shut. James stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the space like a storm cloud rolling in. His dark hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from a late night of drinking with clients. He wore a tailored shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that Emily knew too well could wield devastating force. "What the hell are you doing?" he muttered, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. Emily lowered her gaze, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Nothing," she said quietly. "I was just..." His hand moved so fast she didn't see it coming. The slap connected with her cheek, the same one already bruised, sending her stumbling against the dresser. A sharp cry escaped her lips as she clutched her face, the pain radiating through her skull. James exhaled sharply, as if annoyed by his own actions. "Don't make me late for work," he said flatly, turning away as if nothing had happened. Moments later, the front door slammed, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Emily stayed where she was, her cheek burning, her heart pounding. She waited until the rumble of James's BMW faded down the street before she moved. With shaky legs, she dragged herself to the kitchen, her movements mechanical. The routine was familiar: prepare breakfast, keep the house running, pretend everything was fine. She pulled out a mixing bowl, her hands trembling as she measured flour for pancakes. The simple act of cooking grounded her, a small rebellion against the chaos of her life. Pancakes and coffee, normal breakfast for a family that was anything but that. By the time Lily emerged from her room, dressed in her school uniform, the table was set. James was already back, seated at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone as he ate. He didn't look up as Emily placed a plate in front of him, didn't acknowledge the effort it took her to stand there, her cheeks still throbbing. They ate in silence, the clink of forks against plates the only sound in the room. When James finished, he grabbed his briefcase and keys, leaving without a word. Emily exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. She turned to Lily, helping her into her backpack before walking her to the bus stop at the end of their call. The Atlanta suburb was quiet, the manicured lawns and modern houses a facade of perfection. As the yellow school bus pulled away, Lily's face pressed against the window. Emily felt a pang of guilt. She wanted more for her daughter, a life free from fear, from the shadow of James's anger. But how could she give Lily that when she was barely holding herself together? Back inside, Emily sat on the living room couch, the silence of the house pressing in on her. The mansion, with its high ceilings and gleaming hardwood floors, felt more like a cage than a home. She closed her eyes, memories of her old life flooding back. Before James, she'd been everything a woman could aspire to be: educated, independent, with a promising career at a design firm in Midtown. Her portfolio had been filled with vibrant logos and sleek branding campaigns, her name whispered as a rising star in Atlanta's creative scene. She'd had friends, dreams, a life she'd built with her own hands. Then she met James. He'd been charming, a rising real estate agent with a smile that could light up a room. Their relationship had started as a whirlwind: dinners at rooftop restaurants, weekend trips to Savannah, promises of a future together. The signs hadn't been there, not at first. James had been attentive, almost too perfect, showering her with affection. When he proposed after 6 months, she'd said yes without hesitation, believing she'd found her happily ever after. It wasn't until she got pregnant with Lily that the cracks appeared. James had thrown a lavish party to celebrate, inviting colleagues and friends to their new home in the suburbs. Emily had been glowing, her hands resting on her barely there bump, convinced she'd married a man who cherished her. But that night, after the guests had left, James's demeanor shifted. He'd called her into the living room, his voice calm but firm. "I want you to stop working, Emily," he said. At first, she thought he was joking. "Oh, honey," she'd laughed, brushing it off. "I know you're worried about me, but I love my job. I can't just walk away from it." His face had darkened, his jaw tightening. "I'm your husband," he said, his voice low. "I don't want my wife working. I'll take care of you. You'll stay home." Emily had blinked, her smile fading. "But I can't just sit in this house all day, James. I'll go crazy." "Why?" His tone sharpened, irritation creeping in. "What's wrong with taking care of our home, our child?" She'd sighed, sensing the conversation spiraling. "I've had a long day. Can we talk about this later?" She'd stood, hoping to diffuse the tension, but James had exploded. Without warning, he shoved her back onto the couch, his hand cracking across her face. The sting was immediate, her cheek burning as she gasped, too shocked to move. "Are you stupid?" he spat. "Do I look like a fool to you?" I said, "You're not working anymore, and that's final." Emily had sat there, frozen, her hand pressed to her cheek. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. Had James hit her? She searched his face for remorse, for an apology, but found only cold anger. "You hit me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "So what?" he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You were being disrespectful." "Disrespectful," she echoed, disbelief flooding her. This wasn't the man she'd married, the man who'd promised to love and protect her. Or was it? Had she missed the signs, blinded by his charm? "I'm your husband, Emily," he said, his voice softening slightly, but the edge remained. "I make the rules. You'll sit for the best. You don't need to stress yourself with work. Just focus on the baby and the house." He leaned down, grabbing her chin and forcing her to meet his gaze. "You understand?" She nodded, barely, her throat too tight to speak. Satisfied, he released her and walked away, leaving her sitting there, numb and shaken. The next morning, she'd gone to work anyway, determined not to let one moment define her future. She'd spent years building her career. She wasn't going to throw it away because of a single outburst. But James had other plans. When she returned home that evening, dressed in her favorite blouse and skirt, he was waiting. His eyes narrowed as he saw her, his voice dangerously calm. "What are you wearing?" "I'm dressed for work," she said, her chin lifted despite the fear curling in her gut. "Oh, really?" He let out a bitter laugh. Before she could react, He grabbed his coffee mug from the table and flung the scalding liquid at her. A scream tore from her throat as the heat seared her chest, the pain sharp and immediate. She stumbled back, clutching herself, tears streaming down her face. "Are you crazy?" James roared, slamming the mug onto the table. "Didn't I tell you you're not working anymore?" "James, please," she gasped, but he was already moving. He yanked his belt from his trousers, the leather snapping in the air. Her breath caught, her body instinctively shrinking back. "Please, stop." The first lash struck her arm, a sharp crack that echoed in the room. She cried out, stumbling backward, but he didn't stop. The belt came down again and again, each strike a burst of fire across her skin. Emily collapsed to the floor, shielding herself as best she could, sobs racking her body. The man she'd loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who beat her like she was nothing. When it was over, James left for work without a word, as if nothing had happened. Emily lay there, her body aching, her mind reeling. Was this her fault? Had she pushed him too far? The questions swirled, but no answer could justify the pain. She was too shocked to decide what to do next. That night, James returned with a bouquet of roses and a box of chocolates. "Baby, I'm sorry," he said, kneeling beside her, his voice soft and pleading. "I don't know what came over me. It won't happen again." Against her better judgment, she let him hold her. His kisses were gentle, his apologies fervent, and for a moment she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. But the pain lingered, and so did the fear. The cycle repeated: slaps, punches, belts, followed by apologies and gifts. At first, he begged for forgiveness, but soon, the apologies stopped. The violence became routine, a dark rhythm to their marriage. When Emily miscarried their second child, a loss triggered by a particularly brutal beating, James barely reacted. In the hospital, as she lay hollow and broken, he sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, indifferent to her grief. That was when Emily realized she was losing herself. Her self-esteem shattered, her voice silenced. She made excuses for him, telling herself he was stressed, that he didn't mean it. She prayed for a miracle, for the man she'd loved to return. But the nightmare only deepened now. Sitting in the empty house, Emily stared at the clock on the wall. The hours slipped away too quickly, yet the days felt endless. She pushed herself up, moving to the kitchen to prepare lunch. The mechanical tasks, chopping vegetables, washing dishes, kept her hands busy, but her mind was numb. She was waiting, always waiting, for the only light left in her life. Lily, her daughter, was her reason to keep going, the one thing keeping her from breaking completely. But that evening, everything changed. The Thompson house was quiet that evening, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of crickets outside. Emily moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, her hands trembling only slightly as she plated a simple dinner of grilled chicken and roasted vegetables. The routine was her anchor, a way to keep the chaos at bay. She glanced at the clock. 6:47 p.m. James would be home soon, and the familiar dread coiled tighter in her chest. She set the table, arranging the plates with care, as if perfection could ward off his anger. Lily sat at the counter, coloring a picture of a sunflower, her small tongue peeking out in concentration. The sight of her daughter's focus brought a fleeting smile to Emily's face, a rare moment of warmth in the cold expanse of their home. "Mommy, can we hang this on the fridge?" Lily asked, holding up her drawing. The sunflower was lopsided, its petals uneven, but to Emily, it was a masterpiece. "Of course, sweetheart," Emily said, taking the paper and securing it with a magnet. "It's beautiful." Lily beamed, but her smile faltered as the sound of a car engine rumbled in the driveway. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She smoothed her apron, checking her reflection in the stainless steel of the refrigerator door. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, though she'd tried to cover it with concealer. She adjusted her hair, hoping it would hide the mark. "Lily, why don't you go wash your hands?" she said, her voice calm but urgent. Lily nodded, sliding off the stool and padding toward the bathroom. Emily took a deep breath, bracing herself. The front door opened, and James's heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer. He appeared in the kitchen, loosening his tie, his face etched with irritation. His suit was slightly rumpled, a sign of a long day of meetings, and his eyes scanned the room with a critical edge. "Dinner ready?" he asked, not looking at her as he dropped his briefcase by the counter. "Yes," Emily replied, keeping her voice steady. "It's on the table." He grunted, moving to the dining room without another word. Emily followed, carrying the serving dishes, her movements deliberate. She set the food down, watching as James took his seat at the head of the table. He picked up his fork, poking at the chicken with a frown. "This better not be dry again," he muttered. Emily swallowed, her fingers twisting together behind her back. "I made sure it's moist," she said softly. "I followed your recipe." He didn't respond, just took a bite, chewing slowly. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the clink of his fork against the plate. Emily stood by the table, waiting for his approval, her heart pounding. She hated this part, the waiting, the uncertainty, the knowledge that anything could set him off. She glanced toward the hallway, hoping Lily would stay in her room a little longer. But Lily, oblivious to the tension, skipped back into the dining room, her hands still damp from washing. "Daddy, look at my drawing," she said, pointing to the sunflower on the fridge. "I made it for you." James's eyes flicked to the fridge, then back to his plate. "Not now, Lily," he said, his voice sharp. "I'm eating." Lily's face fell, but she pressed on, her innocence undeterred. "But it's a sunflower, your favorite," I said. "Not now," James snapped, slamming his fork down. The sound made Emily flinch, her body tensing instinctively. Lily froze, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. "James, she's just excited," Emily said, stepping forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll take her to her room." "Don't tell me how to handle my daughter," he growled, his eyes narrowing as he turned to her. "You can't even do the simplest things right. Look at this." He gestured to his suit jacket, hanging over the back of his chair. The fabric was wrinkled, the creases stark against the dark wool. "I asked you to iron this yesterday. Do you know how embarrassing it is to show up to a meeting looking like I rolled out of bed?" Emily's stomach twisted. She'd meant to iron the suit, but Lily had spilled juice on the carpet, and the day had spiraled into a blur of cleaning and errands. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "It slipped my mind. I can iron it now." "It slipped your mind." James's voice rose, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood. "It's bad enough I pay for everything in this house, and you can't even handle the little things you're supposed to do." Emily took a step back, her hands raised instinctively. "Please, James, let me fix it." "Fix it," he roared, stepping closer. "You're useless, Emily, useless." His hand shot out, grabbing the suit jacket and flinging it at her. The heavy fabric hit her chest, and as she caught it, his foot connected with her stomach. The force sent her crashing to the floor, a sharp cry escaping her lips as pain radiated through her body. She curled in on herself, gasping, her hands clutching her abdomen. "Stop it, Daddy." Lily's voice pierced the air, small but fierce. Emily's head snapped up, her heart lurching as she saw her daughter standing between her and James, her tiny body trembling but resolute. "Stop hurting Mummy." James's nostrils flared, his face contorting with rage. "Get out of my way, you little brat," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "Your mother's a disgrace." Lily didn't move, her fists clenched at her sides. "No, you're mean," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Lily, go to your room," Emily pleaded, scrambling to her knees despite the pain. "Please, baby." But it was too late. James's hand moved, yanking his belt from his trousers with a swift, practiced motion. The leather snapped in the air, a sound that sent terror coursing through Emily's veins. She lunged forward, trying to shield Lily, but James was faster. The belt came down with a brutal crack, striking Lily's arm. The little girl shrieked, collapsing to the floor, clutching her arm as tears streamed down her face. Emily's world stopped. Time seemed to freeze as she stared at her daughter, crumpled on the ground, sobbing in pain. Something inside her snapped, a dam breaking, years of fear and excuses flooding away. She scrambled forward, gathering Lily in her arms, shielding her with her own body. "James, stop," she sobbed, her voice raw. "She's just a child." "Oh, I see how it is," James sneered, towering over them. "You two are up on me now." The belt flew through the air again, this time landing on Emily's back. She gasped, the pain searing, but she didn't move. Her arms wrapped tightly around Lily. The blows came again and again, each one a burst of fire across her skin, but she took them without a word, her only thought to protect her daughter. Finally, as if he'd tired himself out, James tossed the belt aside. He straightened his shirt, his breathing heavy, and grabbed another suit from the closet. Without a glance at Emily or Lily, he stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. The house fell silent, the only sound Lily's muffled sobs against Emily's chest. Emily held her daughter tightly, rocking her gently, her own tears falling into Lily's hair. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though her voice shook. "Mommy's here, you're safe now." But the words felt hollow. Safe. They were anything but safe. Not here, not with James. Lily sniffled, lifting her tear-streaked face. "Why does Daddy hate us?" she asked, her voice small and broken. Emily's heart shattered. She cupped Lily's face, brushing away her tears. "He doesn't hate you, sweetheart," she said, though the lie tasted bitter. He's not himself. But I promise, I'm going to take care of you." Lily nodded, but her eyes were filled with doubt. Emily kissed her forehead, her mind racing. This was it. The moment she'd dreaded and avoided for years. James had crossed a line, hitting Lily, their daughter, their innocent child. No more excuses. No more hoping he'd change. She had to leave, and she had to do it now. With trembling hands, Emily helped Lily to her feet, checking her arm. A red welt was forming, but the skin wasn't broken. "Does it hurt a lot?" she asked, her voice gentle. Lily shook her head, though her lip quivered. "I'm okay, Mommy." Emily forced a smile, her heart aching. "You're so brave," she said. "Go to your room and pack your favorite things, okay? Just a few. We're going on a little trip." Lily's eyes widened. "A trip where?" "Somewhere safe," Emily said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "Go on, sweetheart. I'll be there in a minute." Lily nodded and shuffled toward her room, clutching her bunny. Emily stood, her body aching from the blows, and moved to the bedroom. Her hands shook as she opened James's desk drawer, rifling through papers and pens until she found what she was looking for, a small envelope tucked in the back. Inside was a stack of cash, maybe $300, money James kept for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to get them out of Atlanta, away from him. She grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, stuffing it with a few changes of clothes for herself and Lily. She moved quickly, her mind focused despite the panic threatening to overwhelm her. A toothbrush, a pair of sneakers, Lily's favorite sweater. She paused at the sight of her old sketchbook, buried under a pile of scarves. For a moment, she hesitated, then slipped it into the bag. It was a piece of her old self, a reminder of who she could be again. In Lily's room, she found her daughter, sitting on the bed, her backpack stuffed with her bunny, a coloring book, and a small photo of the two of them at the park. Emily's heart clenched at the sight of the photo, taken during one of their rare happy moments. "Good job, baby," she said, zipping the backpack. "We're almost ready." "Mommy, are we leaving Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Emily knelt in front of her, taking her small hands. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice steady now. "And we're never coming back." Lily's eyes searched hers, a mix of fear and hope. "Promise." "I promise," Emily said, pulling her into a tight hug. "Let's go." The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac as Emily and Lily stepped outside. Emily locked the front door, her hand lingering on the knob. This house, with its sleek furniture and manicured lawn, had been her prison for years. She took one last glance, then turned away, her heart pounding but resolute. She wouldn't look back. They walked to the bus stop, Emily's arm around Lily's shoulders, the duffel bag heavy on her back. The streets were quiet, the neighborhood oblivious to the weight of their escape. At the Greyhound station downtown, Emily bought 2 tickets to Macon, a small town 2 hours south where her mother, Sarah, lived. The cashier didn't ask questions, and Emily was grateful for the anonymity. She kept her head down, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of James's BMW. He was at work, she told herself. He wouldn't know they were gone until it was too late. The bus was old, its seats worn, but to Emily, it felt like freedom. She and Lily settled into a row near the back, the duffel bag tucked under their feet. Lily leaned against her, clutching her bunny, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. As the bus pulled out of the station, the Atlanta skyline faded into the dusk, its lights blurring through the window. Emily's heart raced, a mix of fear and exhilaration. Every mile between them and James felt like a breath she hadn't taken in years. Lily stirred, looking up at her. "Are we going to Grandma's?" she asked, her voice soft, double quotes. "Yes, sweetheart," Emily said, brushing a curl from Lily's forehead. "Grandma's going to take care of us." Lily smiled, a small, tentative thing, and nestled closer. Emily stared out the window, her mind racing. She thought of Sarah, her mother, who'd raised her alone after her father's death. Sarah's small house in Macon was modest, Nothing like the sprawling mansion she was leaving behind, but it was filled with love, with safety. It was a place where Lily could grow up without fear, where Emily could find herself again. The bus rumbled along the highway, the hum of the engine lulling Lily to sleep. Emily's hand rested on her daughter's head, her fingers tracing gentle patterns. She thought of the life she'd left behind, her career, her dreams, the woman she'd been. She'd given it all up for James, believing his promises, ignoring the red flags, but no more. This was her chance, their chance, to start over. As the miles stretched on, Emily's thoughts drifted to James. What would he do when he realized they were gone? Would he search for them, his anger driving him to track them down? The thought sent a chill through her, but she pushed it away. She had to focus on the present, on getting to Macon, on keeping Lily safe. She'd deal with James later, if she had to. The bus pulled into Macon late that night, the small station lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Emily woke Lily gently, helping her off the bus. The air was cooler here, the humidity less oppressive than in Atlanta. They took a cab to Sarah's house, a modest bungalow on a quiet street lined with oak trees. Emily's hands shook as she knocked on the door, exhaustion and adrenaline warring within her. The door swung open, and Sarah stood there, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, her eyes widening at the sight of them. "Emily," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and concern. Then she saw the bruise on Emily's cheek, the welt on Lily's arm, and her expression shifted to one of quiet horror. "My God, what happened?" Emily's throat tightened, tears spilling over. "Mama, we're home," she said, her voice breaking. Sarah pulled them into a tight embrace, ushering them inside. The house smelled of lavender and fresh bread, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of the mansion. Sarah didn't ask questions, not yet. She led them to the kitchen, setting out cups of chamomile tea and a plate of cookies for Lily. As Lily nibbled on a cookie, her eyes heavy but calm, Sarah took Emily's hand. "You're safe now," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Both of you." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her fear begin to lift. She wasn't free yet, not completely, but she was here, with her daughter, with her mother. It was a start. The Thompson house was eerily silent when James returned that evening. His tie loosened, his shoulders slumped from a long day of schmoozing clients and dodging his boss's scrutiny. He kicked off his shoes in the foyer, the clatter echoing in the empty space. The absence of sound struck him as odd, but he brushed it off, assuming Emily was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, or perhaps putting Lily to bed. He dropped his briefcase by the stairs and headed to the living room, expecting the familiar scent of roasted vegetables or the soft hum of Emily's voice coaxing Lily through her bedtime routine. Instead, there was nothing, just the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant buzz of cicadas outside. "Emily," he called, his voice sharp with irritation. No answer. He frowned, his footsteps heavy as he moved to the kitchen. The counters were clean, the stove cold, no plates on the table, no lingering aroma of dinner. His jaw tightened. "Emily, where the hell are you?" he shouted, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. Silence answered him again. A flicker of unease stirred in his chest, but he pushed it down, telling himself she was probably upstairs, sulking after their argument. He climbed the stairs, his hand gripping the banister, and pushed open the bedroom door. The room was tidy, the bed made, but something felt off. He opened the closet, his eyes scanning the racks. Emily's side was noticeably sparse. Half her clothes were gone, the hangers empty. His pulse quickened. He stormed to Lily's room, flinging the door open. The bed was neatly made, but her backpack, usually slung over the desk chair, was missing. So was her favorite stuffed bunny. Panic surged through him, sharp and unfamiliar. He yanked open drawers, rifling through them with growing frenzy. In his desk, he found the envelope where he kept emergency cash empty. The $300 he'd stashed there was gone. His breath came in ragged bursts as he tore through the house, checking every room, every corner, as if Emily and Lily might be hiding somewhere. The guest room, the basement, the garage, all empty. His hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. "She wouldn't dare," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "You wouldn't dare leave me, Emily." He grabbed his phone, scrolling through his contacts to call her, but her number went straight to voicemail. He tried again, then again, each unanswered call fueling his rage. He stormed back to the closet, throwing out the remaining clothes. as if they might reveal where she'd gone. "Where the hell are you?" he shouted, his voice breaking. The realization hit him like a punch. She was gone, really gone, and she'd taken Lily with her. James's mind raced. Where could she have gone? Emily had no friends in Atlanta, not anymore. He'd made sure of that, isolating her over the years, cutting her off from the colleagues and neighbors who'd once filled her life. She had no job, no money of her own. She was dependent on him more, so he'd thought. The thought of her defying him, of her finding the courage to leave, sent a wave of fury through him. He grabbed a glass from the kitchen counter and hurled it against the wall, the shatter echoing in the empty house. He needed to think. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, trying to piece together a plan. She couldn't have gone far, not with just $300. Maybe a motel, maybe a bus station. He'd find her, he'd drag her back, make her regret this. But first, he needed to calm down. He poured himself a whiskey, the burn of the liquor doing little to dull his anger. He didn't notice the gas stove he'd left on earlier, a careless habit from the morning's rushed breakfast. The faint hiss of gas seeping into the air. In Macon, the small bungalow on Oak Street was a haven of warmth and safety. Sarah Carter's kitchen glowed with soft light, the smell of chamomile tea and fresh-baked cornbread filling the air. Emily sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug, the steam curling up to her face. Lily was asleep in the guest room, her small form curled under a quilt Sarah had made years ago. The welt on her arm was fading, but the memory of James's belt striking her daughter haunted Emily. A wound that would take far longer to heal. Sarah sat across from her, her eyes gentle but searching. She hadn't pressed for details, not yet, but Emily could feel the questions hanging between them. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Emily, you don't have to tell me everything now, but I need to know you're okay. Both of you." Emily's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill again. She set the mug down, her hands trembling. "I'm not okay, Mama," she whispered. "I haven't been okay for a long time." Sarah reached across the table, taking Emily's hand. "I should have known," she said, her voice thick with guilt. "You stopped calling as much, you stopped visiting. I thought you were just busy with Lily, with him, but I should have seen it." "It's not your fault," Emily said quickly. "I didn't want you to know. I was ashamed. I thought I could fix it, that he'd change." She laughed bitterly, the sound raw. "I was so stupid." "You're not stupid," Sarah said fiercely. "You're strong. You got out. You brought Lily here. That took courage." Emily shook her head, her eyes fixed on the table. "I should have left years ago, before it got this bad. Before he." Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Images of Lily's tear-streaked face flashing through her mind. Sarah squeezed her hand. "You're here now. That's what matters, and you're not alone anymore." Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. She glanced toward the hallway, where Lily slept. "I just want her to be safe," she said. "I want her to have a life without fear, without him." "She will," Sarah said, "and so will you. We'll figure this out together." The words were a lifeline, pulling Emily from the edge of despair. She clung to them, letting them anchor her. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. She wasn't free yet, not completely. James was still out there, and she knew he wouldn't let her go easily. But here, in her mother's kitchen, with Lily safe and the weight of the mansion lifted, she could breathe. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of birds outside the window and the smell of coffee brewing. Lily was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a plate of pancakes, chatting animatedly with Sarah about her favorite cartoons. Emily paused in the doorway, watching her daughter's face light up, free from the tension that had shadowed her in Atlanta. It was a glimpse of the life she wanted for Lily, the life she'd fight for. After breakfast, Sarah took Lily to the backyard to pick flowers, giving Emily a moment alone. She sat at the table, her old sketchbook open in front of her. The pages were filled with designs from her past, logos, posters, illustrations bursting with color. She traced a finger over a sketch of a sunflower, not unlike the one Lily had drawn. The memory of her career, her passion, stirred something inside her. She wasn't that woman anymore, but maybe she could be again. She pulled out her phone, hesitating before opening her email. There were no new messages from James, but she didn't expect any. He wasn't the type to beg or apologize, not anymore. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over the name of an old colleague, Rachel, who'd once been her closest friend at the design firm. Rachel had reached out a few times over the years, but Emily had always brushed her off, too ashamed to admit what her life had become. Now, though, she needed help. She needed to rebuild. She typed a short message. Hey Rachel, it's been a while. I'm in Macon now, starting over. Any chance you know of freelance design work? I'm ready to get back into it. Her finger lingered over the send button, doubt creeping in. What if Rachel didn't respond? What if she'd burned that bridge? But she pushed the fear aside and hit send. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. Back in Atlanta, James's morning was a descent into chaos. He'd barely slept, his mind consumed with Emily's betrayal. He stormed through the house again, checking for any clue of where she'd gone. The empty drawers, the missing clothes, it was real. She'd left him. The thought was incomprehensible. Emily, the woman he'd controlled for years, the woman who'd cowered under his hand, had found the nerve to run. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white, rage boiling in his chest. He tried to focus, to get ready for work. He had a critical meeting at 8 a.m., a pitch to a major client that could secure a multi-million-dollar deal. He couldn't afford to mess this up, but his hands shook as he tried to knot his tie, his mind racing. He grabbed a coffee mug, filling it with the last of the pot, not noticing the faint smell of gas lingering in the kitchen. He'd left the stove on the night before, a careless oversight in his anger, and the tiny flame had flickered out, letting gas seep into the air. He drove to the office, his BMW weaving through Atlanta's morning traffic, his thoughts a jumble of fury and disbelief. He didn't notice the faint haze of smoke rising from his neighborhood as he left. At the office, he was late. 9:15 a.m. by the time he walked into the conference room. The investors were already gone, their chairs empty, his boss's face, a mask of barely contained rage. You had one job. James, his boss, Michael, seethed, his voice low and cutting. One, do you know how much money we just lost because you couldn't bother to show up on time? James opened his mouth to explain, but the words caught in his throat. There was an emergency. An emergency. Michael scoffed, slamming a folder onto the table. You've been slipping for months, James. Missing deadlines, showing up unprepared. This was your chance to prove yourself, and you blew it. If this happens again, you're out. James's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He wanted to argue, to lash out, but he knew better. He nodded stiffly, turning to leave, his mind a storm of anger and humiliation. First Emily, now this. His life was unraveling, and it was her fault. If she hadn't left, he wouldn't be distracted. He wouldn't be failing. As he stepped into his office, his phone rang an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello, he barked. Mr. Thompson, it's your neighbor, Karen, a frantic voice said. Your house, it's on fire. The fire department's here, but it's bad. You need to come home now. James's breath caught, his heart pounding. What? He stammered, his mind struggling to process the words. The whole place is up in flames, Karen said. We tried to call earlier, but he hung up, his hands shaking as he grabbed his keys and ran to his car. The drive back was a blur, his foot heavy on the gas, his mind racing. The gas, he hadn't turned off the stove. The realization hit him like a slap, guilt mingling with his rage. By the time he pulled into his neighborhood, the street was blocked by fire trucks, their lights flashing in the morning sun. Smoke billowed from what was left of his house, the once pristine mansion reduced to a skeleton of charred beams and rubble. James stumbled out of his car, his legs weak. Firefighters moved through the wreckage, spraying water, but it was clear there was nothing left to save. The roof had collapsed, the windows shattered, the life he'd built reduced to ash. He stood there, his jaw clenched, his hands trembling. This was Emily's fault. If she'd been there, if she'd done her job, this wouldn't have happened. He turned away, his chest tight with rage, and drove to a hotel. He'd deal with this later. He'd find her, and when he did, she'd pay. In Macon, Emily's days began to take on a new rhythm. She enrolled Lily in the local elementary school, a small, welcoming place where the teachers smiled and the classrooms were filled with color. Lily was shy at first, but by the end of the first week, she'd made a friend, a girl named Mia, who loved drawing as much as she did. Emily watched her daughter blossom, the fear in her eyes fading a little more each day. Sarah was a constant presence, her quiet strength a balm to Emily's wounds. She helped with Lily, cooked meals, and listened when Emily needed to talk. One evening, As they sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of jasmine, Sarah handed Emily a flyer for a local women's shelter. "They offer counseling," she said, "and legal advice. You might need it if he comes looking." Emily nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the flyer. She hadn't told Sarah everything, but her mother knew enough. The thought of James finding them sent a chill through her, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't live in fear forever. She had to keep moving forward. Her phone pinged with an email from Rachel, her old colleague. "Emily, I'm so glad to hear from you. I've got a freelance project if you're interested, a branding package for a local startup. It's small, but it's a start. Call me." Emily's heart lifted, a spark of her old self reigniting. She called Rachel that night, and by the end of the conversation, she had her first job in years. It wasn't much, a logo and some marketing materials, but it was hers. A step toward reclaiming her identity. She set up a small workspace in Sarah's guest room, her sketchbook open, pencils scattered across the desk. The first strokes were tentative, her hands rusty from years of disuse, but as she worked, the familiar rhythm returned. She lost herself in the designs, the colors and shapes, a language she'd almost forgotten. For the first time in years, she felt alive, like the woman she'd been before James had broken her. Lily would peek in, watching her work, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you drawing for a job, Mommy?" she asked one afternoon, climbing onto Emily's lap. "Yes, baby," Emily said, kissing her forehead. "I'm starting again. For us." Lily smiled, snuggling closer. "I like it when you draw. You look happy." Emily's heart swelled, tears pricking her eyes. "I am happy," she said, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a lie. James Thompson drove through Atlanta's streets, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, his mind a storm of rage and desperation. The hotel he'd checked into the night before was a temporary refuge, a sterile room with thin walls that did little to quiet his thoughts. The image of his charred mansion haunted him, its blackened frame, a monument to his failure. He lost everything: his home, his wife, his daughter, and now, possibly, his career. The investors' meeting he'd botched had cost his firm millions. And Michael's warning rang in his ears: "If this happens again, you're out." He couldn't afford another mistake, but his focus was fractured, consumed by Emily's betrayal. He'd spent the morning calling every contact he could think of: neighbors, old acquaintances, even the parents of Lily's classmates, searching for any hint of where Emily had gone. No one knew anything, or if they did, they weren't telling. He'd made sure Emily had no close friends, no support network, but now that isolation worked against him. She'd vanished like a ghost, taking Lily with her. The thought of her out there, defying him, living without him, sent a fresh wave of fury through his veins. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, the pain barely registering. He pulled into the parking lot of his office, a sleek high-rise in Midtown Atlanta, and sat there for a moment, trying to compose himself. He had a meeting at 2 p.m., a chance to salvage his reputation with a smaller client. He couldn't screw this up. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing his hair and straightening his tie. The man staring back looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. He barely recognized himself. Inside, the office buzzed with activity, but James felt like an outsider. Colleagues avoided his gaze, their whispers trailing him as he walked to his desk. He opened his laptop, trying to focus on the presentation, but his mind kept drifting to Emily. Where was she? A motel, a friend's house. She couldn't have gone far with just $300. He'd find her, drag her back, make her see reason. She was his wife. Damn it, she didn't get to walk away. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. Another unknown number. He answered, his voice sharp. "What, Mr. Thompson?" "It's Captain Reynolds from the Atlanta Fire Department," a calm voice said. "We've finished our initial investigation of the fire at your residence. It appears the cause was a gas leak from the kitchen stove. The flame went out, and the gas built up until a spark ignited it. You're lucky the whole place didn't explode." James's stomach dropped, the words hitting him like a physical blow. The stove, he'd left it on, too distracted by Emily's absence to notice. "Is there anything left?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Not much," Reynolds said. "The structure's a total loss. We recovered some items from the safe in your office, but everything else, furniture, clothes, personal effects, is gone." "I'm sorry." James hung up without responding, his hands trembling, his house, his possessions, his life reduced to ash because of a careless mistake. No, not his mistake, Emily's. If she'd been there, if she'd done her job, this wouldn't have happened. He clung to that thought, letting it fuel his anger. Because the alternative, admitting his own failure, was unbearable. The meeting was a disaster. James stumbled through the presentation, his notes disorganized, his voice unsteady. The client, a local developer, cut him off halfway through, citing concerns about his reliability. Michael, who'd sat in on the meeting, didn't say a word, but his glare spoke volumes. By 3:30 p.m., James was called into his boss's office. "You're done, James," Michael said, his voice cold. "You've been slipping for months, but this is unacceptable. You've cost us 2 major deals in 2 days. Clear out your desk." James stood, stunned, his mouth opening to protest. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "I've given this company everything, and you've taken more than you've given," Michael snapped. "Get out, now." James's hands clenched into fists, but he knew arguing was pointless. He stormed out, grabbing his belongings, a few files, a coffee mug, his laptop, and left the building without looking back. The weight of it all crashed over him as he sat in his car. No job, no house, no family. His life was unraveling, and Emily was to blame. He started the engine, his vision clouded with rage, and peeled out of the parking lot. He didn't see the delivery truck until it was too late. The massive vehicle barreled through the intersection, its horn blaring as James's BMW swerved. Too late. The crash was deafening, metal crumpling, glass shattering. Pain exploded through his body, and then darkness. In Macon, Emily's life was beginning to take shape. 2 weeks had passed since she and Lily arrived at Sarah's house, and the small bungalow had become a sanctuary. The bruises on Emily's face were fading, and the welt on Lily's arm was nearly gone, but the emotional scars lingered. Emily woke each morning with a start, half expecting James to burst through the door. But the quiet of Macon soothed her fears. Sarah's presence was a constant comfort. Her mother's strength a reminder that Emily could rebuild. Lily had settled into her new school, her laughter filling the house as she recounted stories of her day. She'd made more friends, her natural warmth drawing them in, and Emily marveled at her daughter's resilience. She enrolled Lily in an after-school art program, where she spent hours painting and drawing, her creativity a mirror of Emily's own. Watching Lily thrive gave Emily purpose, a reason to keep pushing forward. Her freelance work was picking up. Rachel had connected her with 2 more clients, small businesses in Macon, needing logos and website designs. Emily worked late into the night, her sketchbook filled with new ideas, her laptop glowing with drafts. The projects were modest, but they paid, and more importantly, they reminded her of who she was. She wasn't just James's wife, the woman who'd cowered under his fists. She was Emily Thompson, a designer, a creator, a mother. She was enough. Sarah encouraged her to attend a support group at the local women's shelter. At first, Emily resisted, the shame of her past too raw, but Sarah's gentle insistence won out. The group met in a small community center, a circle of women from all walks of life, each with their own stories of survival. Emily listened, her heart aching as she recognized her own pain in their words. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated, her voice trembling as she shared a fraction of her story. James's control, the violence, the moment he'd struck Lily. The other women nodded, their eyes filled with understanding, not judgment. For the first time, Emily felt seen, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The shelter's counselor, a kind woman named Maria, offered legal advice. "You need a restraining order," Maria said after one session, "and you should start the divorce process. He's not going to let go easily, Emily. Men like him rarely do." Emily nodded, her stomach twisting at the thought of confronting James, even through legal channels. But she knew Maria was right. She couldn't let him control her anymore, not even from a distance. With Sarah's help, she contacted a pro bono lawyer through the shelter, filing for a restraining order, and beginning the paperwork for divorce. The process was daunting, but each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. One afternoon, as Emily worked on a logo design, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it, expecting nothing more than local updates, but the headline stopped her cold. "Atlanta man critically injured in car accident." Her heart raced as she opened the article, her eyes scanning the text. James Thompson, 38, was rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital after a collision with a delivery truck in Midtown Atlanta. Sources report Thompson sustained severe injuries, including spinal damage. A photo accompanied the article. James's BMW crumpled beyond recognition. Emily's breath caught, her hands trembling as she set the phone down. A part of her felt relief, a shameful but undeniable wave that he couldn't come after them now. But another part, the part that remembered the man she'd once loved, ached with a strange mix of pity and grief. She didn't want him dead, didn't want him to suffer, but she couldn't deny the justice of it. His own recklessness, his own rage, had brought him to this. She didn't tell Lily about the accident. Her daughter was too young, too fragile, to process it. Instead, she focused on their new life, on the small victories. She finished her first freelance project, receiving a glowing email from the client and a check that covered a month's worth of groceries. She enrolled in an online design course, brushing up on skills that had grown rusty. And she spent every evening with Lily, reading stories, drawing together, laughing in a way she hadn't in years. Sarah's backyard became their sanctuary. On weekends they'd sit under the oak tree, Lily painting watercolors while Emily sketched. One Saturday, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lily handed Emily a Pantenia bright sunflower, its petals bold and uneven. "For you, Mommy," she said, her smile wide. "Because you're happy now." Emily pulled her daughter into a hug, tears pricking her eyes. "I am, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Because of you." James woke in a hospital bed, the sterile beep of machines filling the air. Pain radiated through his body, but it was the numbness below his waist that terrified him. He tried to move his legs, to shift even slightly, but nothing happened. His breath came in shallow gasps as the doctor's words echoed in his head. "Severe spinal cord injury. You will never walk again." At first, he refused to believe it. This couldn't happen to him, not James Thompson, the man who'd built a life of power and control. But as the days turned into weeks, reality sank in. His body, once strong and imposing, was now a prison. The surgeries were endless, the medical bills piling up faster than he could comprehend. His bank account, once flush with commissions, dwindled with every hospital stay, every therapy session. His insurance covered only so much, and without his job, there was no new money coming in. He'd lost everything. The fire had destroyed his home, his possessions, the life he'd taken for granted. His office bag, containing his business documents and contracts, had been in the car during the crash, reduced to ash in the wreckage. His colleagues, his so-called friends, stopped calling. The men he'd once drank with, the clients he'd charmed, all vanished. He was alone, trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him, with nothing but his thoughts to keep him company, and those thoughts were merciless. He saw Emily's face, bruised and tear-streaked, cowering under his hand. He saw Lily, her small body trembling as she stood between them, her voice breaking as she begged him to stop. He'd been a monster, he realized now, too late. He'd driven them away, destroyed his family with his own hands. The regret was suffocating, a weight heavier than the paralysis that bound him to the bed. He tried calling old contacts, men he'd once considered friends, but no one answered. They were too busy, too distant, too unwilling to deal with a broken man. He dialed Emily's number, knowing it was pointless, but the voicemail was a knife to his heart. He didn't leave a message. What could he say? "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." The words felt hollow, meaningless after years of cruelty. As the weeks passed, James's world shrank to the hospital room, the beige walls closing in. He stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment he'd taken for granted. Emily's laughter, Lily's drawings, the life he'd had and destroyed. He'd thought himself invincible, a man who could bend the world to his will. Now, he was nothing, a shadow of the man he'd been, left to drown in his regrets. 6 months later, Emily stood in the community center, addressing a small group of women from the shelter. She'd started volunteering, sharing her story to help others find the courage to leave. Her voice was steady now, her hands no longer trembling as she spoke. "I was afraid for years," she said, her eyes meeting theirs. "Afraid of him, afraid of failing, afraid of what came next. But leaving was the hardest and best thing I've ever done. You're stronger than you know. You can do this." The women nodded, some with tears in their eyes, others with tentative smiles. Emily felt a surge of pride, not just for herself, but for them. She'd found her purpose, a way to turn her pain into something meaningful. Her freelance business was growing, her designs gaining traction in Macon and beyond. She'd rented a small apartment for herself and Lily, a cozy space filled with color and light. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a home free from fear. Lily was thriving, her laughter a constant melody. She'd joined the school's art club, her paintings covering the walls of their apartment. Emily framed the sunflower painting, hanging it above the kitchen table, a reminder of their new beginning. Sarah visited often, her presence a bridge between their past and future. Together, they'd built a family, not of blood alone, but of love and resilience. One evening, as Emily tucked Lily into bed, her daughter looked up at her, her eyes bright. "Mommy, are we safe now?" she asked, her voice soft but certain. Emily smiled, brushing a curl from Lily's forehead. "Yes, baby," she said. "We're safe, and we're going to be okay." Lily nodded, her eyes drifting shut. Emily kissed her forehead, lingering for a moment, her heart full. She stepped out onto the apartment's small balcony, the night air cool against her skin. The stars were bright above Macon, a canvas of light that stretched endlessly before her. She thought of James, briefly, wondering what had become of him. The news had reported his accident, his injuries, but she hadn't followed up. He was her past, a shadow she'd left behind. She closed her eyes, letting the breeze wash over her. She was Emily Thompson, a designer, a mother, a survivor. She'd rebuilt her life, piece by piece, and she'd never let anyone take it from her again. The future was hers, and it was bright. In the hospital, James lay alone, the beeping of the heart monitor his only companion. The nurses were kind, but their pity was a bitter pill. He stared at the ceiling, his thoughts a loop of regret. He saw Emily's face, not bruised but smiling, the way she'd been when they'd first met. He saw Lily, her laughter echoing in a house he'd never see again. He'd had everything: a family, a home, a life, and he'd destroyed it all. Tears rolled down his cheeks, the first he'd shed in years. He'd been a fool, a monster, and now he was nothing. The man who'd once controlled everything was now controlled by his own broken body, his own broken choices. He closed his eyes, the weight of his regret heavier than the paralysis that bound him. For the first time, he understood the pain he'd inflicted, but it was too late. Emily and Lily were free, and he was alone, a prisoner of his own making.